Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Valuing Resilience in Solar+Storage Microgrids, a new critical load tiering approach. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy Group on behalf of the Resilient Power Project. And we have with us our host for this webinar, Seth Mullendorf. Seth is a Vice President and Project Director here at Clean Energy Group. Before I pass it over to Seth and to our guest speaker for today, I'm going to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can call in via telephone, or you can connect using your computer, mic, and speakers. If you'd like to minimize your webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also click on that to expand your control panel. And one of the things that we would love for you to do on your control panel is submit questions and comments. We ask that you do that throughout the webinar. Don't wait until the very end to submit your questions. We've got a ton of people registered today, so hopefully we're hoping that means a lot of questions, and to make sure that we get to your questions, do type those in when you think of them. Don't wait until the end. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email within 24 to 48 hours with a copy of that recording and a PDF of our slides. And we'll also put all those materials up on our website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. So with that, I'm going to pass it over now to our moderator for today's webinar, Seth Mullendorf. As I said earlier, Seth is Vice President and Project Director here at Clean Energy Group, and he's going to get us started. Seth?
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you to everyone joining us today for this great webinar. I'm just going to give you a little bit of introduction to who we are before kicking things off. So Clean Energy Group, for those that don't know us, we are a national nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 20 years now in the clean energy advocacy space. We also have a sister organization called the Clean Energy States Alliance that is a membership organization of groups that manage the state clean energy funds, and that's mainly composed of state energy offices. So Clean Energy Group, we are fortunate to have the support of several foundations that are listed here. And this webinar today is brought to you by our project called the Resilient Power Project, which is a joint endeavor with the Meridian Institute. The Resilient Power Project really was an answer to outages that occurred in the Northeast post hurricane or superstorm Sandy, and has grown from there. The goal of the Resilient Power Project is to enable greater access to clean, resilient power technologies, primarily solar, paired with battery storage for low-income communities, communities of color, and otherwise underserved communities. We do that through several different ways. We work on a lot of policy initiatives, trying to get the right policies and programs in place to enable greater access to solar and storage, particularly for lower income communities. We also do a lot of putting out reporting with original analysis to try to show the economic benefits and the resiliency benefits of solar and storage, particularly for affordable housing and critical community facilities, which could be anything from a community center to a food bank to first responders or even hospitals. We work a lot with policymakers, and we also work a lot with community groups. We try to help facilitate actual project development as well, working a lot with local entities, community-based organizations, to try to help them understand what solar and storage can do to advance resilience in their own communities, and to do project assessments to try to move those forwards. In that capacity, we have worked with over 150 projects throughout the country, providing in-house technical support and financial assistance support, trying to help them understand the financing side of projects as well as the technical side. You can see every dot here represents one or more projects that we worked on. Part of that is through a technical assistance grant fund that we can support project evaluations through small grants to engage with third-party expertise. So we have a lot more information available on our website at cleanegroup.org, including webinars like this that are recorded and saved. We have all of our reports on there, as well as many case studies from projects that we've worked on across the country. So please take a look at cleanegroup.org if you'd like to learn more about us and our work. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. We are very fortunate to have with us today Craig Lewis, who is the founder and executive director of a great nonprofit, Clean Coalition. He has over 30 years of experience in renewables, wireless, semiconductor, and banking industries. Craig was previously the Vice President of Government Relations at Greenvolts. And there he was the first to successfully navigate a solar project through California's Renewable Portfolio Standard solicitation process. Craig was energy policy lead on Steve Wesley's 2006 California gubernatorial campaign. His resume includes senior government relations, corporate development, and marketing positions at leading wireless, semiconductor, and banking companies such as Qualcomm, Ericsson, and Barclays Bank. Craig has an MBA and a Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering from University of Southern California, and a Bachelor's in Electrical Engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Craig, and just one more reminder to please submit your questions as we go throughout the webinar, and don't leave them at the end to make sure that we have time to get to your questions. Okay, Craig?
Thank you, Seth. And I am excited to share this presentation today. It's the first big presentation that I have made on this super important topic. And there's a lot of information here. It's largely colorful and hopefully is easy to understand. But I will be moving fast because there is a lot of information, and I want to make sure there's time for a robust question and answer period at the end. And the slides will be available for download through Clean Energy Group and also at the Clean Coalition website. I will, throughout the presentation, there's going to be a number of concepts that I will go through, as well as I will define the value of resilience 1, 2, 3 methodology, which is essentially the way to value resilience from solar microgrids. And then I'm going to present a couple of case studies, one from a high school in the Santa Barbara region of California, and then a community microgrid case study for the broader Santa Barbara region. So with that, I'm going to try to progress my slides. And it is not progressing yet. Okay, there we go. All right, so just real quick introduction to the Clean Coalition, because it's important for folks to understand where I'm coming from. And I am the founder and executive director. So the mission statement for the Clean Coalition is really where I'm coming from. And the Clean Coalition's mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. And our end game vision is to get to 100% renewable energy. And really, it's just a matter of how accelerated the time frame is to get there. But when we do get to that 100% renewable energy end game, we believe that that 25% of the total consumed electricity will come from local renewable energy resources. That means that they're interconnected within the distribution grid, and they're facilitating resilience. You have to be, that energy generation has to be local in order for it to facilitate resilience. And in order to do that, you cannot be dependent on the transmission grid, which by default means you're coming from, that energy is coming from a long distance away. So if 25% of the total energy is coming from local renewables, and we're 100% renewables, you can do the math. That means that 75% of the electricity in the end game is going to come from remote renewables that will be dependent on the transmission grid in order to get that energy to where people live and work, which is where the loads are. Okay, first concept I want to introduce is that natural gas infrastructure is not resilient. So the picture here of the San Bruno neighborhood blowing up in the year 2010 was about 5 miles away from where I lived at the time. That type of accident is not uncommon. There are natural gas disasters of this same scale that happen about once every 2 months throughout the United States. They're so common that you only really hear about them if they happen in your region of the country. So the assertion that natural gas generation is resilient is false. In fact, natural gas infrastructure is not resilient. I'll show you from that chart here in just a moment. But natural gas infrastructure obviously can be flat out dangerous and highly vulnerable to earthquakes, fires, landslides, terrorism, and other disasters. So what we're looking at here in this chart is a study, results from a study that the city of San Francisco did for a major earthquake. And in this size earthquake, a 7.9 Richter scale earthquake, every service goes down. Gas, electricity, communications, water, everything. What these two line charts show here is how long it takes to restore the electricity service versus the gas service. So the electricity service, in order to get 60% of the customers back online, requires 3 days. The restoration for a similar 60% of gas service customers will take 30 times longer. It'll take 3 months. So, that's just a peek into how not resilient the natural gas infrastructure is. All right. So value of resilience, a really important part of the value of resilience is understanding that all loads are not created equal. Loads have different value. So when you go in and talk to anybody and say, do you think that there's value to indefinite renewables driven backup power to your critical loads? The answer, of course, is absolutely. And then you ask the corollary question, which is, well, what is that value? And people kind of shrug. They don't know. And when people don't have an answer, they tend to put a zero value on it. And that's a problem that we need to overcome. And that's what the Value of Resilience 1, 2, 3 initiative is all about, is to make sure that we establish a standardized value of resilience for critical, priority, and discretionary loads so that everybody will understand what value to put on that. And when they're looking at doing a solar microgrid, for example, they can say, okay, I put a 25% adder on my electricity bill in order to pay for that extra layer of resilience that a solar microgrid will bring. So fundamental to the value of resilience 1, 2, 3 approach is to make sure that we tier the loads into their relative value categories. And tier 1 are the most valuable loads. These are the mission critical, life sustaining loads. And they should have 100% resilience. And tier 1 loads in a typical facility represent about 10% of the total load. Tier 2 loads are priority loads. These are loads that you will keep online as long as you can do so without threatening the ability to keep your tier 1 loads on. And tier 2 loads typically represent about 15% of the total load. The rest of the loads are totally discretionary. Nobody's going to die if tier 3 loads go down. And those typically represent 75% of the total loads. Okay, so a typical load tiering from a solar microgrid, load tiering for resilience from a solar microgrid, and this is an example from University of California, Santa Barbara. I'm going to be using a lot of information from the Santa Barbara region because that's where my case studies are from that I'm going to present later. And what this chart shows is the percentage of load that can be kept on for it versus percentage of time. So you can see here that the bottom stack, if you will, the tier 1 critical loads, those are geared to be 10% of the load. And if you look at the horizontal axis, that is percentage of time. They are maintained 100% of the time. Now, I should say that this example is from UCSB. It has a ratio of solar to energy storage of 2 hours of energy storage for each kilowatt of solar. So in this case, for every 200 kilowatts of energy, we're going to have 200 kilowatt hours of energy storage for each 100 kilowatts of solar. And under that scenario, for this part of the world, given solar resource quality, we will be able to maintain 10% of the load 100% of the time. We will be able to maintain an additional 15% of the load, which is your typical tier 2 percentage of load. That additional 15% of the load will be able to be maintained for at least 80% of the time. And then the tier 3 load, the rest of the load, the other 75%, that will be able to be maintained for at least 25% of the time. So this level of resilience can be provisioned by a solar microgrid that essentially has enough solar to net zero a site in the Santa Barbara region and has 2 hours of energy storage on it for each kilowatt of solar. Now, I want to just make the point here that diesel generators, which is unfortunately the go-to resilient solution out there in the world today, diesel generators are designed for very limited resilience. So what this chart looks very similar to the last one, but you can see a little red square there, a little red rectangle that I'm moving my cursor around on. That is what a diesel generator is typically designed for. It's designed for keeping about 25% of the load. It's typically designed to keep the tier 1 and tier 2 loads on, and that's typically about 25% of the total load. But an average diesel generator installation only keeps those loads on for 2 days. So a very small percentage of the time. When the Clean Coalition talks about indefinite resilience, we're talking about forever. And as a proxy for indefinite, we use 30 days. So you can see that this red rectangle, which it represents the amount of resilience you're going to get from a typical diesel generator installation, is very limited in terms of the amount of time that it can keep the loads on and the amount of load that it will keep on. So it's 25% for 25% of the typical load for about 2 days. And after that, it's lights out. It's goodbye. So that's an important concept to keep in mind here. And in order for a diesel generator to provide the same level of resilience as a solar microgrid, you're going to be in a price scenario that is about the same as a solar microgrid, but you're not going to get the economic and environmental benefits. So a solar microgrid is vastly superior to a diesel generator based solution. Okay, whoops. Okay, so the Clean Coalition made a hypothesis that a solar microgrid brings a value of resilience that warrants about a 25% adder to the electricity bill of a specific site. And we've come about this through what we call the value of resilience 1, 2, 3 methodology. The 1, 2, 3 is by tiering the loads. And the way we came up with that is we asserted that the tier 1 loads are worth, if you're going to keep them on 100% of the time, that's worth about 3 times the average price paid for electricity. With the tier 2 loads, keeping the tier 2 loads on for at least 80% of the time is worth 1.5 times the normal price paid for electricity. And then the tier 3 loads, these are discretionary. Most people are not going to pay anything more for keeping the tier 3 loads on. So there is no multiplier effect on the tier 3. But if you do the math, 3 times premium for the tier 1s, which are usually 10% of the total load, and a 1.5 times multiplier on the tier 2, which are generally 15% of the load, that basically comes out to, you do the math, that comes out to a 27.5% premium to the electricity bill. So somewhere between 25 and 30%, the Clean Coalition has just resolved on the 25% as the typical adder that a site should be willing to pay for the level of resilience that a solar microgrid will provide to them, to that site. Now, we don't expect everybody to just bite off on the Clean Coalition's hypothesis. So we went out to prove this theory correct. And we came up with 4 approaches for validating the VOR 123 methodology. The first approach is what we call cost of service. This is a normal term and normal approach in the electricity industry. It's based on how much does it cost to provision the service. It's the cost of the service. And if you do the math on the cost of service and based on a number of solar microgrids that the Clean Coalition has worked on, the 25% is an adder that will allow the vast majority of solar microgrids to be cost effective. And I'll show you some data from the case study that I'm going to show you from a Santa Barbara based high school and some other schools in that same school district momentarily. So just ride with me on the first approach here till I get to that case study. The second approach is what we call the Department of Energy multiplier. So the DOE has done a lot of research on the value of resilience, and they came up with this magic number of $117 per kilowatt hour. And what that means is that if you take all of the grid outages over the course of a year and you accumulate the number of hours, then for the critical loads, the $117 per kilowatt hour is the lost value of all of those hours of electricity that you lost. And so we did the math on 3 schools in the Santa Barbara Unified School District, which includes the San Marcos High School, the one that I'm going to talk about as my case study. But we looked at an elementary school, Franklin Elementary School. If you can see the table here, I know it's a little bit small, but hopefully you can see that. We looked at a junior high school, Lacumba Junior High School, and we looked at San Marcos High School. So we looked at 3 different schools. What's probably obvious is that the high school is a much larger campus than the junior high, and the junior high is a much larger campus than the elementary school. And the economics, of course, shift around depending on the size of the deployment. And so what we derive from this DOE multiplier approach is that the value of resilience for the high school is it basically gets us a 20% adder. We get a 30% adder at the junior high school, and we get a 56% adder at the elementary school. And that just comes down to what percentage of their load is considered to be tier 1 critical. It's a higher percentage for the smaller campus. The smaller the campus, the higher the percentage. Tends to be a correlation that works out. But on average, if you take it across the entire Santa Barbara Unified School District, which has about 20 schools, the DOE multiplier comes out to an adder of 30%. That's how much the DOE would say the resilience value is for these schools. So that one confirms our 25% adder under the VOR 123 approach. Then we have a market-based approach. The market-based approach is to take a look at projects that are already out there. And there's a solar microgrid at a facility called Direct Relief. It's a well-known facility in the Santa Barbara region. It is one of the biggest provisioners of emergency medical supplies to disaster-stricken areas. So when there's a disaster, whether it's in Oklahoma for a hurricane or somewhere in Africa or anywhere else around the world, these guys have medical supplies getting on an aircraft. The airport is right across the street from this facility, and those supplies are getting air delivered out to where they're needed. Now they have a solar microgrid there that is almost exactly the same size as the one that is geared for San Marcos High School. And the amount of money that they're paying for their solar microgrid is almost identical to what we're anticipating is going to be the case at San Marcos High School. And as you'll see from the case study, the adder that we need at San Marcos High School is less than 25%, and I'll go through those numbers in more detail during the case study. The last approach that we've used is essentially valuing versus the versus the essentially the avoided cost of a diesel generator. And this is important because, as I mentioned before, most people go to a diesel generator as the de facto approach for providing resilience. And we've done the analysis here, and we've said we've done the analysis for a diesel generator to provide the equivalent level of resilience that you get from a solar microgrid. And when you do the math, and by the way, this slide and the two subsequent slides have the key assumptions and inputs, and we're happy to share the calculator that we've developed to do this analysis. But when you do the math and you size the diesel generator, you size the diesel fuel tank that is associated with that generator, you incorporate the cost of installing that diesel generator and maintaining it over time, including the fact that you have to turn it on about once a month to run through its operations and maintenance servicing. It gets expensive, and it comes out to you would have to pay a 25% adder in order to install a diesel generator. And we did this for a site that is a little bit smaller than San Marcos High School. It has 1 million kilowatt hour annual load is the assumption we used. But that 21% adder is in the neighborhood of the 25% adder that we started off with our hypothesis. And so we feel like we're very validated in terms of justifying that 25% adder that sites a property owner or a facility manager should feel that they are going to pay up to 25% more in order to get the type of resilience that will get delivered to their facility from a solar microgrid. As I said, these are assumptions that went into the diesel generator cost analysis. I'm not going to go through the details of it, but we wanted to provide it because we're trying to be honest here with everybody. And most people talk about diesel generators as if they're very low cost approach. And the reality is it might be low cost, but it's about the same as a solar microgrid. So people need to understand that. And this last slide is just looks at the diesel generator efficiency data, which I find to be very interesting because diesel generators almost never run at their optimum capacity, which is nameplate, right? You want them to be fully loaded in order to get optimum efficiency out of that diesel generator. But typically, diesel generators can be running at half the half of its nameplate, and it's going to be far less efficient when it does so. Again, I'm not going to go into these data into the data that we're looking at here, but it's in the presentation, and the presentation is available for people to poke through. And as I mentioned as well, Clean Coalition is happy to share the calculator that we have to come up with these conclusions. Okay, so a couple of key concepts around the value of resilience 1, 2, 3 approach. And I see that I had a typo in the title slide here. It's not the value of resilience 1, 2, 3, 3. It is the value of resilience 1, 2, 3. So the first concept that I want to go through is that load management is critical. It's also the least developed part of the solution set that's needed to implement a solar microgrid. And what load management means is if we're going to provide indefinite resilience for the tier 1 loads, then we have to have the ability to turn the tier 2 loads off if they're going to threaten the ability to keep the tier 1s on, and we have to be able to turn the tier 3s off if we're going to be able to make sure that we keep the tier 2s on as long as possible and the tier 1s on forever. So there's multiple ways to accomplish the load management, but I wanted to just touch on load management because it is absolutely critical. And the easiest, most cost-effective way, kind of if you do all the trade-offs, there's an approach that we call the critical load panel approach, and basically requires a the insertion of a smart critical load panel, and these panels are available from companies like Atom Power and Schneider Electric and Schweitzer and Eaton. You know, there's a number of companies out there that make smart load panels, which you can use as a smart critical load panel. And what this basically allows you to do is you serve your tier 1 loads and your tier 2 loads directly off that critical load panel, that smart critical load panel, which will automatically toggle the tier 2 loads off if needed in order to maintain the tier 1s, and it will toggle them back on once there's enough solar and or energy storage state of charge. The tier 2 loads will be toggled back on. The tier 1s will be kept on forever. They never turn off. The tier 3 loads in a critical load panel approach get toggled on and off as a group. So the tier 3s in a critical load panel approach will either be completely on, meaning their power is served to them, whether they're on or not, depends on whether they're being operated, whether the light switch is turned on or off for a particular appliance. But there will be power served to those to all of the loads on the site if the tier 3s are on, and then you just turn them off as a block if you need to preserve that the available energy for your tier 2s and tier 1s. The tier 2s through the critical load panel can be prioritized. They can be force ranked and prioritized such that the least important of the tier 2s would be the first to turn off, and etc. So the critical load panel approach is an approach that is relatively cost effective and relatively precise in terms of making sure that you're serving your tier 1s forever, and you're toggling your tier 2s in an automated fashion, and then you're toggling your tier 3s as a block, and that also is automated, but it's either all on or all off for the tier 3s. So I mentioned there is other approaches to solving the load management, but the critical load panel approach is a nice compromise between precision and cost effectiveness. Okay, another concept that I want to go through here is the way that the batteries need to be operated. A lot of people think of a battery and they get somebody tells them, oh, you got a megawatt hour battery, and they go, fantastic, I get to use that. I get a megawatt hour of battery capacity here. But what's kind of hidden behind the scenes is that you generally have some reserve at the top that is going to accommodate battery degradation over the years. And a typical lithium-ion battery degrades by about 2% of its energy capacity per year. Okay, that's not a ton, but it's not trivial either. And you'll want some reserve at the bottom as well to accommodate for battery degradation, and also for maintaining the longevity of the battery, and potentially for maintaining the warranty of the battery. The space in between is what you really need to keep in mind, and that is the usable capacity of the battery. And when I say the usable capacity, I'm not talking about the usable capacity day 1. I'm talking about the usable capacity day year at the end of year 10 or at the end of year 25. If you're in a 25-year power purchase agreement for a solar microgrid, for example, you want to know what's the smallest level of energy capacity you're going to have access to over the course of that 25-year power purchase agreement, right? It's not what it's day 1, it's what it's at the lowest point. And in a typical power purchase agreement for a solar microgrid, whoever the DBU is, the designer, builder, owner, operator of that solar microgrid, is going to warrant, is going to guarantee a certain daily capacity that can be cycled every day. And you want to know what the worst case of that is, and it's usually somewhere in the between years 10 and 15, when they're going to either replace everything or largely service it to get that capacity back up to a level it was at the beginning of the power purchase agreement period. But the colorful areas here, the blue and the green, these are really important to think about. And the difference between the blue and the green is that the blue is the portion of the battery capacity that you're going to use for economic optimization. things like avoiding non-bypassable charges on NEM exports, things like the time of use arbitrage, and things like demand charge management. The green is the amount of battery charge that you need to reserve for resilience. That is defined as the minimum state of charge that you need to keep your tier ones on forever. And that, we call that the soccer. It's the state of charge, minimum state of charge needed for resilience. That changes constantly. And this slide right here, you'll have these slides, but I'll just show you, I'll just tell you real quickly, the yellow is solar generation. The blue is the soccer level which changes at every 15-minute interval in this slide. And the Clean Coalition has developed a soccer calculator that will tell you at every 15-minute interval what that soccer needs to be. If you lost the grid right then at that moment, at that 15-minute interval, what does the soccer need to be at that moment to ensure that you can keep those tier 1 loads on forever? And so that changes, and you can see it's a sawtooth pattern. This is the worst solar production days of the year, this 5-day period we're looking at here, and that's what drives the maximum soccer value, which is what you need to design your battery for. Your battery needs to be able to maintain the maximum soccer value, and it needs to maintain that at the worst degradation point over whatever period you're looking at for your solar microgrid. And so that's what we're looking at here. And I'm going to move on because that's gets to be a complex topic, but you know, the basics of it are really important. And you want to, I will just say, you want to minimize your soccer at every instant, because that gives you the maximum amount of the battery capacity to play with for economic reasons. And you want the economics to be as strong as possible. Okay, I'm going to go into a case study here. San Marcos High School. I'm going to go fast because we're running out of time. So San Marcos High School, large public high school in the Santa Barbara area, has a little over 2,000 students, grades 9 through 12. It's a Red Cross designated facility, has all of the you know, all of the benefits of a normal large public high school. It's got a big pool, multiple playing fields, including lighted football stadiums. It's got a cafeteria, auditorium, et cetera, et cetera. It also has the distinction of being the high school that I graduated from in 1981. Not sure that that's its big defining feature, but it's important to me. San Marcos High School is also in the middle of a very transmission grid vulnerable region called the Goleta Load Pocket, which is a 70-mile stretch of California coastline that is served by a single connection point to the transmission grid. And that transmission connection comes over a route that is 40 miles long through treacherous mountainous terrain that's right in the middle of landslide risk, fire risk, and earthquake risk, right? This region, the Goleta Load Pocket, is extremely transmission grid vulnerable. As you can see, if you look closely, University of California, Santa Barbara is right in the middle of that region, and the cities of Goleta, Santa Barbara, and Carpinteria are kind of the biggest loads that are served by the region. Southern California Edison, which is the utility that serves the Goleta Load Pocket, has said very clearly that this transmission connection is extremely vulnerable, and it's threatened by fire, earthquake, landslide risks. And if it goes down, it could be down for weeks. Well, I shouldn't say if it goes down. When it goes down, it could be down for weeks and even months at a time. So San Marcos High School's pretty much in the middle of the Santa Barbara Unified School District service territory. Here's, we got San Marcos. This is all within the Goleta Load Pocket. What you can see here on this map is that we've got red is extreme fire risk. That's the worst, that's the highest fire risk level. The orange is fire is tier 2, so it's a little bit lower risk. But you can see San Marcos High School is just surrounded by extreme fire risk, not to mention earthquake risk and whatnot. So the solar microgrid that is being geared for San Marcos High School is about 725 kilowatts of solar, entirely in the form of solar parking canopies. That is enough solar to get us to just beyond net zero. And the battery system there is geared to be 700 kilowatt hours. The critical loads, the tier 1 loads there, are basically the food service refrigerators and freezers. That represents an average load of about 4.5 kilowatts, which represents about 3.5% of the total average load. The priority loads, the tier 2 loads, these are the gymnasium lights, which is where the staging for disaster recovery and potentially emergency sheltering would occur in the gymnasium and in the fields near the gymnasium. And so the lights that are there and the plug loads, and then also what Santa Barbara Unified School District calls the main distribution frame. This is the communication system. And so it's basically the emergency staging area, and the communication systems are the tier 2 loads. These are almost identical in terms of what their average load is, relative to the tier 1s. They're almost identical in size. And those need to be maintained, 80% plus of the time. So in addition to San Marcos being in the, very grid vulnerable to the transmission system, which is this purple trace in this map, it is also very vulnerable to the distribution system. San Marcos is a little star here. It's a little bit hard to see, but I'm moving my mouse around it. You can see the distribution feeder. Well, the transmission line terminates into the Goleta substation, which is the reason it's the namesake for the Goleta Load Pocket. It's named after this substation called the Goleta substation. It takes 220 kV transmission in and has 66 kilovolt distribution feeders coming out. And the feeder that serves San Marcos High School comes over and is right through the middle of the fire threat zone, extreme fire threat zone, and goes back in on the distribution side, or the lower voltage distribution side, in this blue trace. And that's a 16 kV feeder. So San Marcos is just super grid vulnerable, from the transmission grid to the distribution feeders that serve it. Now, everybody always wants to know the economics. So the economics here, these numbers that we're looking at, these are all the schools in the Santa Barbara Unified School District. San Marcos is circled here in blue. And what these numbers represent, these are the break-even, essentially the 15.3 cents is the average price that's paid for electricity in San Marcos in 2019. That number's about 10% higher now, but it was about 15.3%, 15.3 cents last year per kilowatt hour. These other numbers, the 11.7 cents represents the amount that solar alone is worth. Now, solar alone produces in the middle of the day. It's got the lowest value. That's now the most off-peak time of the day. So it has solar only has less value than the average cost of electricity. If you put some energy storage on that, but not in a microgrid fashion, you just have energy storage on there, you can increase the value of the solar by time shifting it for demand charge management and non-bypassable charge avoidance, and for time use arbitrage, et cetera. So you got the value comes up a little bit. And then if you put that 25% value adder on it, which means you take 25% of that 15.3 cents and you add that to your 12.9 cents, you have a 16.7 cents is the value of a solar microgrid to San Marcos High School. And this slide basically shows for all of the schools in the Santa Barbara Unified School District zone, if they're shaded in green, it means that they make economic sense. And I will tell you that these numbers are based on having a 3% escalator on the PPA. But what we have found, and this slide was made about 6 months ago, what we have found is that the pricing is coming in where we're going to be at fixed rates on these PPAs, not without an escalator, right? So it'll be 15 cent, will it be 14.5 cent flat for the critical load panel approach here, not 14.5 cents with a 3% escalator on it. And what that also means is that the cost effectiveness has improved to the point where almost all of these school campuses are going to make economic sense. I just really quickly touch on the fact that you can take this VOR 123 methodology and move it up to a full community microgrid scale. It does not have to be limited to a particular site, does not have to be limited to a behind the meter situation. So going back to the Goleta Load Pocket, super transmission grid vulnerable area. The Clean Coalition has done the math. In order to have 100% resilience to transmission grid outage for the Goleta Load Pocket, we need 200 megawatts of additional solar and 400 megawatt hours of additional energy storage. Now, this is the perfect location for having a community microgrid. It's super grid vulnerable. It's got a world-class research institution right in the middle of it. You can see UCSB is right here. It's literally just a few miles away from the Goleta substation itself. This area has been stricken by a number of disasters. I think people remember the mudslides in Montecito, which took out 10% of the housing stock there, 400 homes, and led to the demise of 24 people. This is an area. Montecito is part of the Santa Barbara community and is in the Goleta Load Pocket. The magic numbers here: 200 megawatts of new solar, 400 megawatt hours of energy storage. The 400 megawatt hours of energy storage are going to be easy. There's already been California Public Utility Commission approval for 280 megawatt hours of energy storage. So that's going to come online by the middle of next year. The tough part is going to be getting the solar. And in order to get solar into this region, we need it to be on rooftops, parking lots, parking structures. We need it to come from a feed-in tariff type of approach, so that we get big chunks on parking lots, parking structures, sites that don't have a lot of load, but they have beautiful solar siting opportunity. Net metering doesn't allow us to take advantage of those sites. So we need a new market mechanism. We need a feed-in tariff for this region, and frankly for everywhere else too, to make sure that we can get lots of renewables into place locally and get that resilience benefit. I will just say, as big as these numbers might sound, 200 megawatts of solar is about 5 times more solar than currently exists in this load pocket. But this load pocket has only about half the state average in terms of penetration of solar so far. So it should only be about a 2.5 times more solar than what we have in the region. And that represents 7% of the technical siting potential on rooftops, parking lots, parking structures. So if we got 100% of that 200 megawatts of new solar from rooftops, parking lots, parking structures, we would need 1 out of every 15. Okay, this is not like putting a man on the moon. This is totally achievable, but obviously it's going to take time. Now, the Goleta Load Pocket, or the Goleta substation, has 8 66 kV feeders that are served by it, and those in turn serve the entire Goleta Load Pocket region. I'm going to zoom in on a target feeder. This is the feeder that I believe makes the most sense to do the very first really comprehensive scale community microgrid in the country. This 66 kV feeder, it's traced in gold, and then it comes down and it serves UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. It serves at 66 kV, and it also serves 2 distribution substations that are called the Isla Vista substation and the Vegas substation. So those feeders that come out of those substations are 16 kV. And this whole region has some really significant critical community facilities, including UCSB, which is Santa Barbara County's primary emergency sheltering site. So if there's a disaster and you have nowhere else to go, you are supposed to go to UCSB. And it also has the airport there. So the airport is adjacent to UCSB. And there's a number of other critical community facilities in here. This is zoomed in a little bit further. We've got multiple fire stations. We've got multiple water and sanitation districts. We've got direct relief. Direct relief is right here near the airport, on the other side of the airport from UCSB. Some really important critical community facilities. And there's also the Goleta Load Pocket's primary commercial and industrial section is in this same footprint that we're looking at right now. It's served by this exact same feeder. So there's a lot of solar siting opportunity at UCSB and on big rooftops, parking lots, parking structures at the airport and at these commercial and industrial facilities. And this is a block diagram view. It's my last slide, but I want to show this because I mentioned the energy storage that's coming into place into the Goleta Load Pocket. The largest battery, I said there's 280 megawatt hours of energy storage that's been approved already. 160 megawatt hours of that has been approved in a battery that's going to interconnect at 66 kV right here near on the high voltage side of the Isla Vista substation. And by the way, that's the same feeder that comes down and serves UCSB, which already has a whole bunch of solar at it, could have a whole bunch more. There's a whole bunch they've got direct relief. Direct relief can have, it already has a solar microgrid, but it's got, if we can get a feed-in tariff, it can put about 5 times more solar in place than it currently has. If you look at a view of it, it's got a very small percentage of its rooftop is covered with solar, and the rest of it is wide open, and the big parking lot is wide open as well. So with that, I'm going to stop and hopefully maximize time for the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Craig. And we've gotten a lot of questions. We are not going to get to all of them. I'm going to try to prioritize here. I'm trying to do that as I've gone through. For folks that asked, this is all going to be recorded. We are going to be able to share the slides as well. Thank you, Craig, for that. And we usually get that out within a day. So you guys will all get an email on that. We're also including a survey in that. CEG is collecting some data on projects that people have explored, so we'd appreciate if you filled that out. So Greg, in addition to these resources, some people have asked about the calculators you mentioned, the soccer calculator. Is that stuff that is currently available to folks? How would they be able to get a hold of those resources or contact you about using them?
Yeah, what we'll do, Seth, is we'll provide the diesel calculator we'll provide to you. We'll just send it over to you so you can make it available, hopefully with the same, web, whatever the same landing page that you're making the presentation, the recording available from. The soccer calculator is actually represents a massive investment that the Clean Coalition has made in intellectual property, and is a very sophisticated calculator that we are not giving away for free, but we will make the services available to help people understand what their soccer needs to be. And we'll try to be as helpful as we can. And we certainly, critical community facilities, we help lots of them, around the country. We would, try to do that for free as much as we can. But if we are involved in a significant analysis, obviously we would need to get some budget coverage for that. But the soccer calculator is not available just because we have so much investment wrapped up into that. We've got to make sure it's kind of becomes a funding opportunity for the Clean Coalition. Certainly.
So, and I encourage people to directly reach out to Craig. If you want to go to the slide where you have your contact information on there, again, Craig, so people have that. And we'll share all these questions with Craig as well, and make sure if there are ones that need to be addressed that we don't get to, that we figure out a way to make that happen. So there was a question related to the last point, several, about the more distributed microgrid, multiple facilities, and how that works as far as prioritizing critical loads. Could generation resources at different facilities support loads not on site at that facility, and how are those determined as far as prioritization?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm gonna, sorry folks, I'll go back to my contact details in a moment, but the way that I can answer the question best is to, oops, sorry, I took us out of the presentation for you. Okay. So this block diagram basically has a whole bunch of pinkish plus symbols and bluish plus symbols. The blue plus symbols are smart meters, and Southern California Edison has smart meters deployed throughout its entire service territory. So every facility can be turned on or off, remotely through its smart meter. The pinkish plus signs, these are grid isolation switches. And so the grid isolation switches allow for the distribution grid to be used to connect various portions of the grid. So for example, let's say there's a massive disaster that takes out the transmission connection to the Goleta substation. Then this switch, this grid isolation switch right here, just on the low voltage side of the substation, will open and will isolate this feeder from the rest of the grid. So there are 8 66 kV feeders that come out of the Goleta substation, but this switch will allow us to isolate this particular 66 kV distribution feeder, which is referred to as number 4311, from the other 7 66 kV distribution feeders. And we do that to make sure that we have enough energy to keep our tier 1s and tier 2 loads within this footprint online, right? The tier 1s have to be maintained indefinitely. Now let's say that somebody runs into a power pole right here that's separating from our that first grid isolation switch that opened and this next one. Then we would open here and we would open this grid isolation switch, and this can be automated. This isn't like somebody has to be there, flipping switches. This can be automated based on logic. And if this grid isolation switch opens, then essentially what happens is we have the battery is still interconnected and can serve and provide the grid forming function for this whole section of the feeder, which can keep UCSB online and make sure all that solar that's at UCSB can come up and keep this portion of the grid working in concert with that massive battery. We've got solar at other facilities here. There's large commercial industrial players like Deckers. If you know Deckers brands, they've got the UGG boots and flip-flops and all sorts of good stuff. That's located right here, right next to the Santa Barbara Airport. And the Santa Barbara Airport is fed by 2 different feeders, but the most critical loads at the airport are the runway lights and the air traffic control tower. And those are fed off the feeder that is also serving Deckers. So the solar that goes into Deckers can basically be maintained. We could open this grid isolation switch and we can have a solar microgrid at Deckers that basically is able to keep those most critical tier 1 loads at the airport online. So the answer to the question is, if we get the utilities to participate by allowing their distribution feeders to be used and to agree to put the grid isolation switches in place, then we can then we can have behind the meter facilities, basically 1-by-1 facilities with behind the meter assets, and in combination with front of meter assets like this massive battery, all of these things coordinated together to provide resilience to an entire community. And we can just we can tier the facilities, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, just like we tier the loads. And in fact, we would tier the loads at the tiered facilities to make sure we have the right prioritizations. And if there's a facility that's a tier 3, there's nothing that's critical to the community about it. And it's not contributing any solar energy or energy storage to the mix from behind the meter, then those facilities will be turned off when we have to shed the tier 3 loads. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm happy to go into more detail because that's a near and dear subject. Community microgrids is the answer to that question, and community microgrids are near and dear to the Clean Coalition's heart. And there's a lot of information on the Clean Coalition website about community microgrids.
Thank you, Craig. I think you did well at addressing the question there. A couple of people asked about including in your diesel calculations, the cost calculations. Did you include negative health impacts in that as well? The emissions, due to the negative emissions.
No. So that would just be upside. The Clean Coalition does a lot of policy work as well, and when we go in and we advocate for outcomes at the California Public Utilities Commission, for example, we find that a lot of the environmental health, kind of intangibles, if you will, they just get discounted, and so we don't go to bat with those. We step up to the plate with the hardcore economic analyses, and that's what we do with that's what we did with the diesel calculator analysis. It's based on just actual tangible economic savings. And yes, I agree that there's a lot of intangible value from health and environmental benefits of avoiding the diesel, but we did not include any of that in our avoided diesel calculator.
Great, thank you. There was a question about just critical loads, like truly like emergency management designated critical loads, such as elevators in high-rise buildings, emergency lighting, and critical loads in medical facilities. If solar and storage is able to, through regulatory environment, able to, I guess, be used in those instances, or if they are not designated for those kind of designated critical loads, whereas sometimes the definition really kind of points towards needing a traditional generator. Is that something that you've run into? Yeah.
So, sorry, can you just clarify one thing? Did you say, was that question specific to diesel generators or just any type of microgrid service?
So it's really to the solar and storage side for things that are designated that building must have these powered during an emergency situation. Sometimes there's more stringent codes on the requirements that are sometimes they're written specifically for diesel generators, or there has to be that almost instantaneous transfer. Whether solar and storage microgrids can meet those stringent guidelines.
Solar microgrids can meet those requirements. In fact, I'm supposed to, and I'm not getting off this call early because this is more important, and I've got other people handling the final report presentation we're making to the Los Angeles Community College District. The Clean Coalition just finished a feasibility study for one of their sites, and one of the important areas we needed to research was for City of Los Angeles requirements for fire and life safety loads, like the exit signs and the fire the fire extinguishers, fire alarms, etc. Those loads have, there's very stringent requirements for how those loads need to be served, and the solar microgrids meet those requirements. So I believe that hospitals have some challenges to meet those requirements, but there's a company called ChargeBliss. Clean Coalition has worked with in a couple of different instances, and they have done a Kaiser facility. David Bliss, who leads that organization, who leads that company, ChargeBliss, he's a physician, and he sits on the OSHA board that is dealing with getting their rules changed to accommodate solar microgrids being able to satisfy even the hospital requirements for meeting those critical loads. So it's a very good question, and the answer is that in most cases the solar microgrids satisfy all the requirements, and they can happen as instantaneously as a diesel-based microgrid, and the few instances that you might have trouble with, like at the hospitals, for every single load you could point to at a hospital, those rules are also in flux and will, before long, I believe within the next year or two, will also allow solar microgrids to satisfy all of the requirements.
Thank you. That's great to hear, because I know we've run into that question a number of times. So I know we're a few minutes over the hour right now, and we've started to lose people at the 2 o'clock time. So I think we're going to have to close things off now. As I said, we are going to share all of these questions with Craig, and please do reach out to him yourself if you have continued questions that we didn't get to at this time. Thank you so much, Craig, for all of the great information. We got a lot of positive feedback. Thank you to everyone that joined us and stuck on the line. I'm going to hand things back over to Sam just to talk to you about any future webinars that we have coming up.
Hey, thanks, Seth, and thank you, Craig. So as Seth said, we do have a bunch of webinars coming up. You can see some of those listed on our screen, and we are currently working on scheduling a few more. So some of those didn't make the list, and they're getting added to our website now. So check our website out, cleanegroup.org/webinars. That's where you can find our full listing of upcoming webinars, and you can also find webinar recordings there for today's webinar and all of the other webinars that we've had recently. So that's it for us today. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everyone who attended. We hope to see you at another webinar soon.
All right, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.